The letter arrived on the morning of his engagement ceremony. Not a message, not a formal council communication. A handwritten letter, sealed with the old wax mark of a pact that had been dissolved 4 years ago, delivered by a courier who had been traveling for 11 days and who handed it to Veldran Pack's gatekeeper with the specific, compressed urgency of someone who had been told that this letter needed to reach the Alpha before the morning was over. The gatekeeper brought it to Drev Ashvale's household coordinator. The household coordinator looked at the seal. She looked at the date of the ceremony, 3 hours away. She looked at the letter. And she made a decision that she would describe, years later, as the single most significant administrative choice of her 30-year career. She walked past the formal receiving room where the engagement preparations were in final progress, past the council chamber where the delegate witnesses were assembling, and directly to the Alpha's private study. She knocked. She entered. She placed the letter on the desk in front of Drev Ashvale. "This came this morning," she said. "The courier has been traveling for 11 days. The seal is Ashfen Pack's. Ashfen Pack. Dissolved 4 years ago." Drev looked at the letter. He looked at the seal. He looked at his coordinator with the specific expression of a man who has just been handed something that is going to change the shape of the next several hours. "Give me Croft," he said. "Now." She went. He opened the letter. And the engagement ceremony that had been 3 hours away became, by the time he finished reading, something considerably more complicated than it had been before the courier knocked on the gate. If you have ever had one piece of information arrive at exactly the moment when it could change everything, this story is going to hold you from beginning to end. Like the video, hit that subscribe button right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. What was in that letter is the thing nobody in Veldran Pack knew to look for. Let's begin. Her name was Wren Ashfen. She was 25 years old when the letter was written, which meant she was 25 when everything that had happened to her pack and her family and herself was finally put into words and given to a courier with 11 days of road ahead of him and one destination. I want to tell you who she was before I tell you what the letter said, because the letter only makes sense in the context of the person who wrote it. Wren was the daughter of Ashfen Pack's head archivist. Ashfen Pack had been small, 112 wolves, in the eastern foothills of the Northern Territories, with a history that was longer than most packs twice their size and a reputation built on one specific, unusual distinction: their archive. 300 years of comprehensive, meticulous, cross-referenced pack history. Not just Ashfen's own records, but the records of every pack in the Eastern Foothills network, maintained and preserved through generations of archivists who had understood that history was the most durable form of governance protection a small pack could possess. If you needed to know the founding terms of a territorial boundary from 170 years ago, Ashfen's archive had it. If you needed to verify a bloodline claim that predated the continental governance's formal record-keeping, Ashfen's archive had it. If you needed the specific, documented terms of an agreement between two packs that both sides had inconveniently forgotten, Ashfen's archive had it. Wren had been the archivist's daughter, and then the archivist's apprentice, and then, by 22, the archivist herself, when her father's health had declined too far for the work to continue at the pace the archive required. She was 22 and responsible for 300 years of other people's history. She had handled it the way she handled most things, with the specific, patient thoroughness of someone who had grown up understanding that accuracy was not perfectionism. Accuracy was protection. Accuracy was what stood between the people whose history you preserved and the people who would rewrite that history if given the opportunity. She had been 22, and 23, and 24, maintaining the archive with the same meticulous care her father and grandfather and great-grandmother had maintained it. And then, in the winter of her 24th year, Ashfen Pack had been dissolved. The dissolution was not violent. I want to be clear about that, because the dissolution of a small pack carried, in the Northern Territories, a specific set of associations: territorial conflict, forced absorption, The particular brutality of a larger pack using its power to eliminate a smaller one. That was not what happened to Ashfen. What happened was governance collapse. Ashfen's alpha, a wolf named Wes Cray, who had been leading the pack for 6 years, and who had the specific fatal quality of a governance leader who was better at maintaining existing structures than at adapting when those structures failed, had made 3 consecutive significant errors in the pack's resource allocation planning. The errors had compounded. By the 3rd year, the compounding had produced a deficit that exceeded the pack's capacity to address through internal means. The Continental Governance's formal dissolution process, the one that activated when a pack could no longer sustain its own operational requirements, had been initiated by the Oversight Committee at Wes Cray's own request, because he had the specific, painful self-awareness to understand that his pack's wolves deserved stability that he could no longer provide. The dissolution had been orderly. The pack's wolves had been dispersed to neighboring packs through a formal placement process, interviewed, assessed, matched with communities that needed their specific skills. The archive had been. This was the specific, catastrophic detail that Wren had spent 4 years trying to address. The archive had been mismanaged in the dissolution process, not maliciously, through the specific, careless bureaucratic haste of an oversight committee that was processing a complicated dissolution under time pressure and that had not, in the rush, paid adequate attention to the specific, irreplaceable nature of what was stored in the Ashfen archive. The archive's 300 years of cross-referenced records had been sorted by a committee assistant who did not understand what they were sorting into 2 categories: records with obvious territorial or financial implications, which had been preserved and filed with the Continental Governance, and records without obvious territorial or financial implications, which had been designated for disposal. The territorial boundary records had been saved. The bloodline records had been designated for disposal. Wren had found out 3 weeks into the dissolution process, when she had inquired about the archive's transfer and had been told by the committee's administrative office that the non-territorial holdings were scheduled for destruction the following Friday. She had run, not metaphorically, she had physically run to the archive storage facility. She had spent 43 hours, with the committee's reluctant permission and a 72-hour stay of the destruction order that she had negotiated through a combination of formal complaint and the specific, documented argument that bloodline records had legal status in governance proceedings that the committee's categorization had incorrectly overlooked. She had saved what she could. Not everything. 43 hours was not enough for 300 years. But she had prioritized with the systematic ruthlessness of a trained archivist who understood exactly which records had the highest potential governance significance, and she had saved 4 large boxes and 11 bound volumes of bloodline documentation that would otherwise have been destroyed. She had taken those boxes with her when she was placed, through the formal process, in a new pack. She had been cataloging them, one by one, for 4 years. On the night of her 25th year, working through the 11th bound volume, she had found the record that had prompted the letter. The record was from 73 years ago. A formal bloodline registration, submitted by a family from the Eastern Foothills and recorded by Ashfen's archivist at the time, documenting the birth of a child with full parentage records, witness attestations, and the specific biological markers that wolf bloodline registrations required. The child's name was documented. His parents' names were documented. And the family name, the name that the child and his parents and their extended family had carried, was Ashvale. Specifically, the Ashvale family, documented as the cadet branch of the founding line of what would become, 2 generations later, Veldran Pack. And the biological markers. The specific, documented genetic heritage that the old-style bloodline registrations had recorded in the shorthand of wolf biology. The markers that indicated not just family origin, but the specific, moon goddess-designated mate bond potential that the old records had tracked for generations before the practice had been discontinued as an invasion of privacy. The markers in the 73-year-old registration matched, with the specific, unmistakable precision of a document that had been prepared by someone who understood what they were recording. The markers of a living bloodline. The call bloodline. Wren's bloodline. The registration was not documentation of an existing bond. It was not a prediction, not a prophecy, not anything mystical or dramatic. It was a simple, factual recording of what the biological science of wolf heritage could predict about compatibility, the specific way that two bloodlines, tracked across generations, carried the markers of what the old practitioners had called a destined bond. Not guaranteed, but documented. In the Ashvale line it referenced, the cadet branch, 2 generations removed from the founding line, was the direct ancestral line of Drev Ashvale, the current alpha of Veldran Pack. Wren had sat with the document for 3 hours. She had then written the letter. The letter said, "To Alpha Drev Ashvale of Veldran Pack. My name is Wren Ashfen, formerly Wren Call, formerly the head archivist of Ashfen Pack, now resident in Crestwood Pack since Ashfen's dissolution 4 years ago. I am writing to you regarding a document I have found in the portion of Ashfen's archive that I preserved during the dissolution process. I want to be precise about what I am and am not claiming. I am not claiming that this document is anything other than a historical bloodline registration from 73 years ago. I am not claiming that historical bloodline registrations are binding or predictive in any formal governance sense. The practice of recording mate bond markers was discontinued 60 years ago precisely because the science was imprecise and the practice produced significant social harm when the records were treated as determinative rather than indicative. What I am claiming is this: the document exists. It is authentic. I have applied the full archival verification process, and the document passes every authentication standard. It records a genetic heritage connection between the Ashvale founding line and the Call bloodline, with specific markers that the recording archivist identified as indicative of mate bond potential. I am also telling you, because honesty requires it, that I have experienced something since approximately the age of 21 that I did not understand until I read this document. A directional awareness. A warmth. The specific, persistent consciousness of something pulling toward a direction I could not name. I did not understand what it was. Reading this document, I believe I understand now. I am not writing to demand anything or claim anything or make any request of your governance or personal life. You have lived your life without knowing this document existed, and you are entitled to continue doing so. I am writing because this document belongs to the Ashvale family history as much as to the Call family history, and because accuracy requires that you know it exists. Whatever you choose to do with this information is entirely your decision. I will respect any decision you make, including the decision to file this letter without response. But I could not, in conscience, keep this information from you. With respect, Wren Ashfen. Drev read the letter twice. Then he called for Croft, the pack's head healer, who had been at Veldran for 20 years and who was the specific, trustworthy repository of the biological and historical knowledge that the letter was referencing. Croft arrived in the study in 5 minutes. He read the letter. He was quiet for a long time. The bloodline marker practice, Drev said, was real science, Croft said quietly. Imprecise, yes, the markers indicated potential, not certainty. But the biological basis was genuine. A pause. The reason the practice was discontinued was not because the science was wrong. It was because the records were being used coercively. Families were using them to arrange bonds that the individuals involved had not consented to. But the markers themselves, Drev said, were accurate indicators of biological compatibility, Croft said. The highest level of compatibility. The kind that, in wolves who encounter each other, typically manifests as the mate bond, Drev said. Yes, Croft said. Drev looked at the letter. The warmth she describes, he said. The directional awareness. Croft was very quiet. You've experienced it, Drev said. Not a question. I've observed it in you, Croft said carefully. For approximately 3 years. A quality of unease that appears directional without having an identifiable direction. I had no framework for it. Drev looked at the letter. The ceremony is in 3 hours, he said. Yes, Croft said. Marit Voss is in the formal receiving room, he said. Her family is in the East Wing. The delegate witnesses are assembling. Yes, Croft said. The engagement was formally announced 6 weeks ago, Drev said. The alliance terms between Veldren and Westfen are predicated on the formal bond. Yes, Croft said. And a woman in Crestwood Pack has sent me a letter explaining that a 73-year-old document suggests she is my fated mate, Drev said. Yes, Croft said. Drev put the letter down. He stood up. He went to the window and looked out at the Pack grounds, where the ceremony preparations were visible, the flower arrangements, the formal seating, the quiet efficiency of a household that had been planning this event for 6 weeks. Is the document authentic? He said. I'd need to examine it, Croft said. But Ashfen's archive was never found to contain a fraudulent document. In 300 years. She says she applied the full archival verification process, Drev said. Ashfen-trained archivists were the best in the Eastern Territories, Croft said. If she says it passed authentication, it passed. Drev was quiet. What are my options? He said. You proceed with the ceremony, Croft said. The document exists but has no formal governance status. The engagement is legally binding. You honor the commitment. And the bond, Drev said. If the markers are what the document says they are, then you live with an unactivated bond for the rest of your life, Croft said. The engagement bond with Marit Voss will be real, in the way that chosen bonds are real. The fated bond will remain, he paused. Dormant. Or, Drev said. Or you delay the ceremony, Croft said. You meet this woman. You determine whether the document's claim is accurate. And you make your decision with full information. The alliance with Westfen, Drev said, would require renegotiation, Croft said. The Voss family, Drev said, would require a very difficult conversation, Croft said. 6 weeks of preparation, Drev said. Would require explanation, Croft said. Drev turned from the window. Get me Hadwick, he said. And then get me Marit. The conversation with Marit Voss happened in the private sitting room adjacent to the formal receiving room. She was 28 years old and she was. Drev understood this completely and without equivocation. A person of genuine quality. She was composed and intelligent and had approached the 6 weeks of engagement preparations with the specific, grounded practicality of someone who understood what a political bond was and what it required and who had decided to bring her full self to it rather than a performance. He told her about the letter. He told her everything. The archivist, the document, the markers, the dormant pull he had experienced for 3 years that Croft had observed and not been able to name. Marit listened. She was very quiet when he finished. Show me the letter, she said. He showed her. She read it. She put it down. You should meet her, she said. He looked at her. You should meet her, she said again. Before any decision is made. You should see for yourself whether what the document describes is real. The ceremony can wait, she said. 3 hours can become 3 days if the guests are told there is an administrative matter requiring resolution. It's not elegant, but it's true. And the alliance, he said. The alliance between Veldren and Westfen is in both our packs' genuine interests, she said. It is not dependent on my personal bond status. My father is a governance alpha. He understands that governance interests do not disappear because personal arrangements change. She paused. He will not be pleased, but he will understand. Marit, he said. I have been in proximity to you for 6 weeks, she said. You are a good alpha and a decent man, and you have treated me with respect throughout this process. A pause. I have not felt the bond. He held her gaze. Neither have I, he said. I know, she said. I have known for 3 weeks. She stopped. I was deciding whether to say anything. The alliance mattered, and the engagement had been announced, and I did not want to produce instability that affected 200 wolves over my own uncertainty. You should have told me, he said. You should have told me about the 3-year directional awareness, she said. He was quiet. Yes, he said. We should have been more honest with each other. We're being honest now, she said. Yes, he said. Send for her, Marit said. Send a courier today, and I will speak to my father. He looked at her. You're being extraordinarily generous, he said. I'm being practical, she said. A political bond built on a suppressed fated mate is not a stable foundation for an alliance. My father will understand that, even through his frustration. She stood up. Also, she paused. A woman who preserved 4 boxes and 11 volumes of documents for 4 years because they belonged to the people they were about, and then spent months cataloging them, and then wrote an honest letter about what she found instead of simply arriving at your gate and making claims. That is someone worth meeting regardless of the biology. He looked at the letter. Yes, he said. She is. The courier was dispatched within the hour. The engagement ceremony was delayed. The guests were told, in the careful language of Hadwick's 30 years of household management, that an administrative matter of governance significance had required a brief postponement, and that the Alpha expressed his personal apologies for the disruption and would provide a full account when the matter was resolved. The delegate witnesses were, by various accounts, confused and curious and not entirely satisfied with the explanation, but they were also wolves who had been in governance long enough to understand that unexpected complications were part of the landscape. The Voss family required a longer conversation. Marit's father, Corin Voss, was, exactly as Marit had predicted, not pleased. He was also, as she had also predicted, ultimately capable of engaging with the governance logic of the situation. A fated mate bond suppressed by a political arrangement, he said, at the end of a 3-hour conversation with Drev. You're telling me this was the foundation I was about to build an alliance on. I'm telling you I received new information this morning that I could not in good conscience ignore, Drev said. I am also telling you that the alliance's governance interests have not changed. What may change is the personal architecture of the arrangement. And my daughter, Corin said. Your daughter told me to send for the archivist, Drev said. She is a remarkable person. Whatever happens with the bond, that remains true. Corin was quiet for a long moment. She told you to send for her, he said. Yes, Drev said. The archivist who saved 4 boxes of records, he said. And 11 bound volumes, Drev said. Another silence. I want to see the document, Corin said. I'll have Croft arrange it, Drev said. Wren arrived in Veldren Pack 6 days after the courier reached her. She had not sent a response ahead. The courier had delivered the Alpha's message, a brief, formal communication requesting her presence at Veldren at her earliest convenience, with the specific, understated phrasing that said without saying that whatever was happening was significant, and she had packed 2 bags, including the document and the surrounding archival context, and traveled for 6 days. She had spent those 6 days with the bond pulling northeast, toward Veldren. She had understood, writing the letter, that the bond had been directional for 4 years. She had understood, intellectually, that if the document was what it appeared to be, the direction would be explained. Intellectual understanding and the actual experience of 6 days of travel, with the warmth intensifying with every 100 miles, were 2 different things. She arrived at Veldren's gate in the morning. She was let in. She was brought to Hadwick, who received her with the specific, composed warmth of someone who had been prepared for this arrival and who had decided that the appropriate initial register was professional welcome. The Alpha will see you in the study, Hadwick said. Wren followed her. She stopped at the study door, not because she was afraid, because she had been feeling the direction for 6 days, and the direction was now immediately, completely, overwhelmingly present on the other side of a door, and the moment she walked through that door, everything that had been abstract and documented and theoretical for 4 years was going to become real. She breathed. She opened the door. Drev Ashvale was at the window. He turned when she came in. He looked at her. She looked at him. The bond arrived fully. Not the arrival of something new, for both of them. It had been present for years in its incomplete, directional form. The arrival of the completion of something that had been waiting for exactly this. The two people in the same room, within range, after years of the biology, knowing something the people did not. The study was very quiet. "You wrote the letter," he said. "Yes," she said. 11 days for the courier, he said. "I sent it the morning after I found the document," she said. "I did not want to wait." "Most people," he said, "who found a document like that would either use it for personal advantage or decide it wasn't their responsibility and say nothing. The document belongs to both families," she said. "Accuracy required that you know it existed." He looked at her. Not the way she had imagined he might look at her. Not dramatically, not with the cinematic weight of a significant moment being performed for an audience. Just directly, with the full attention of someone who was encountering a specific person and was paying the attention that person required. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat. "Tell me about the document," he said. "Not the summary you put in the letter. The full archival context." She put the document and the surrounding materials on the desk. She told him. All of it. The archive's history, the dissolution, the 43 hours, the 4 boxes and 11 volumes, the 4 years of cataloging, the discovery. She told him what the bloodline marker practice was and what it was not, what the document claimed and what it did not claim, what the archival verification process had confirmed. He listened with the quality of attention she had, in 6 days of traveling, tried to prepare herself for, and had not quite managed to fully prepare for, the specific, total attention of someone who was listening to the actual thing rather than waiting for the version they expected. When she finished, he was quiet. "The directional awareness," he said. "Since I was 21, she said. "Always northeast," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet. "For me it had no direction," he said. 3 years of a pole with no orientation. My healer observed it. We had no framework. "You're not northeast of anything," she said. "You're the center point." He looked at her. "What were you expecting," he said, "when you wrote the letter?" Genuinely. She thought about this honestly. "I expected you to file it," she said. "Most likely. You were engaged to someone else. The document has no formal governance status. The most probable outcome was that the information would be acknowledged and nothing would change. But you sent it anyway," he said. "Accuracy required it," she said. "I could not keep a document that was part of your family history from you, because the disclosure was inconvenient for me." "Inconvenient for you," he said. "I had spent 4 years not understanding what the pole was," she said. "Understanding it, and then not being able to do anything about it would have been," she stopped. "Hard," he said. "Yes," she said. "But that was my problem to manage, not yours." He looked at the document. "The ceremony was postponed," he said. "I know," she said. "The courier mentioned it. Marat Voss told me to send for you," he said. She absorbed this. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. "She is," he said. She also said that a woman who preserved 4 boxes of records for 4 years because they belonged to the people they were about was worth meeting regardless of the biology. Wren was quiet for a moment. "She was right," Wren said. "The records belonged to everyone documented in them. Keeping them was not generosity. It was accuracy. You use that word often," he said. "It is the most important concept in archival work," she said. "The past is not what people remember. It is what happened. Accuracy is the only protection against history becoming whatever the most powerful person in the room decides it was." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That is also true of governance. Of everything," she said. They sat across from each other with 300 years of archived history on the desk between them, and the bond full and present and patient, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Drev said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me," she said. "I have been leading this pack for 8 years," he said. In 8 years, I have made decisions that I believe were correct, and I have made decisions that I later understood were wrong, and I have made decisions that I had adequate information to make differently and chose not to because the information was inconvenient. He looked at her steadily. The engagement was one of the third kind, he said. I knew the bond was not there. Marit knew it was not there. We both chose to proceed because the alliance was real and the bond's absence seemed like something that could be managed. Could it? She said. No, he said. Managed is not the same as absent. A suppressed fated mate bond does not resolve into nothing. It produces the kind of slow wrongness that packs feel without being able to name. He paused. I have been governing from a position of managed wrongness for 3 years. I should have addressed it. You didn't know what it was, she said. I knew something was wrong, he said. I chose to manage it rather than investigate it. Yes, she said. That is a fair assessment. He looked at her. You are not going to tell me it's all right, he said. No, she said. You made a choice that you've acknowledged was not fully honest. That's not something I'm going to smooth over. What would you have done, he said. I would have investigated the pull, she said. 3 years ago. I would have gone to the healer and said something is happening that I don't understand, and I would have pursued it until I understood what it was. That would have required admitting uncertainty, he said. Yes, she said. Alphas are not generally, he stopped. Accustomed to admitting uncertainty, she said. I know. It's a governance culture problem in high-authority environments. I've read enough pack history to have seen it produce significant errors. Including mine, he said. Including yours, she said. He was quiet. I am going to ask you something, he said. Ask, she said. What do you want, he said. Not what the bond requires. Not what the document implies. What do you, as a person, want from this situation? She had been asking herself this since she found the document. I want the document to be properly archived in the Ashvale family holdings, she said. It belongs there. That is not negotiable regardless of anything else. He almost smiled. And personally, he said. She thought about 4 years of a pole that pointed northeast. I want to understand who you are, she said. Not the Alpha King of Veldrin. The person. Whether the person is someone I would choose, independent of the bond. And if the person isn't, he said, then we have a bond that is biologically documented and personally misaligned, she said. Which is not ideal, but which would at least be understood rather than suppressed and unaddressed. You would tell me, he said, if you found the person and the person wasn't sufficient. Accuracy requires it, she said. He looked at her. And if the person is, he said. She held his gaze. Then we have a more interesting conversation, she said. She stayed in Veldrin for 3 weeks. Not in the formal guest accommodation of a diplomatic visitor, in the small residential suite that Hadwick managed for extended governance guests, adjacent to the PAC's main administrative building, close to the archive. Because there was, it turned out, a great deal in Veldrin's archive. She had asked, on the second day, whether she might examine it. Hadwick had brought this request to Drev. Drev had told Hadwick to give Wren full archive access. She had been in the archive for 12 of the first 14 days. Not continuously. She emerged for meals, for the conversations with Drev that happened in the evenings when the governance day was concluded, for the specific, gradually more personal discussions that had started professionally and had moved, over 14 days, into the other territory. She had told him this directly, on the 11th day, which had prompted one of the expressions she had filed under, real rather than managed. Exactly the person the document's context suggested he would be. Precise. Serious. With a quality of honesty that was not always comfortable for him, but that he maintained anyway, because he had, she was understanding, made a decision somewhere in the 3 years of suppressed wrongness to be more honest rather than less. He was also, beneath the precision and the seriousness, funny. Not publicly. The PAC's governance record did not reflect this. But in the evening conversations, with the day's requirements concluded, there was a dry, quiet humor that emerged when something struck him as genuinely absurd, and he had stopped managing the response. She found this worth filing. She also found, in the archive, 3 additional documents with Ashvale call cross-references that the 73-year-old registration had only partially captured. She brought them to him on the 15th day. He read them. He looked at her. "There are 4 documents," he said. "Yes," she said. "The original registration, which I sent you, and 3 additional references in the cross-index, each of which independently confirms the biological documentation. For documents," he said, "across 3 separate archivists' work, spanning 40 years. Ashfen's archivists were meticulous," she said. "When they documented something, they documented it thoroughly. Like someone I know," he said. She looked at him. That was the first personal thing he had said that was not framed as a question or an observation. She filed it. "Yes," she said. "The conversation with the Voss family happened at the end of the 2nd week. Not adversarial. By Hadwick's account, which she gave to Wren because she had understood, by the 2nd week, that Wren received information calmly and used it accurately rather than creating instability with it. The conversation had been difficult, but had concluded in a place that both parties could accept. The alliance between Veldren and Westfen was restructured as a direct governance treaty, without the personal bond requirement, on terms that reflected the genuine mutual interests that had always been the foundation of the arrangement. Marit Voss came to see Wren on the last day of the 2nd week. She sat across from her in the small sitting room adjacent to the archive. She looked at Wren for a long moment. "You wrote an honest letter," she said. "Accuracy required it," Wren said. "Accuracy is one word for it," Marit said. "Another word is courage." Wren was quiet. "I'm sorry for the disruption," she said. "The ceremony. Your family." "Don't be," Marit said. "A political bond built on a suppressed foundation was not going to serve either of us." She paused. "And my father has renegotiated to his satisfaction, which is what my father generally does." "I'd like to meet him someday," Wren said. Marit looked at her. "You would like him?" she said. "He respects people who do their research before making claims." "I try to do my research," Wren said. "I know," Marit said. "4 documents. Independently verified. Across 3 archivists spanning 40 years." She looked at the archive door. "He also respects people who are honest about what they don't know." "The documents indicate potential," Wren said, "not certainty. The biology is real, but the person is the person," Marit said. "Yes, I know." A pause. "Is he?" Wren thought about 11 days of evening conversations and dry, quiet humor, and the specific quality of someone who maintained honesty even when it was uncomfortable. "Yes," she said. "Good," Marit said. She stood up. "The document that started this," she said. "Where is it going to be archived?" "The Ashvale family holdings," Wren said. "All 4. They belong there." "And the archivist?" Marit said. Wren looked at the archive door. "I expect," she said carefully, "that will be a conversation." The conversation happened on the evening of the 3rd week. Drev's study. The same desk where he had first read the letter. Wren had become comfortable in this room in a way that she had not been prepared for, and did not try to manage. "The 3 weeks are almost concluded," he said. "Yes," she said. "You came to understand who I was," he said. "Yes," she said. "And," he said. She thought about what she had found. "The governance record shows an alpha who builds things well and adapts slowly," she said. "The 3 years of suppressed wrongness was an adaptation failure. He knew something was wrong and managed it instead of investigating it. That's a governance assessment," he said. "The person," she said, "is the governance record plus the evening conversations plus the dry humor that appears when something is genuinely absurd, plus the specific quality of honesty that is maintained even when it is uncomfortable, plus the way he read 4 documents independently and said there are 4 documents with the expression of a man who is adding evidence rather than defending a position." He looked at her. "Is that sufficient?" he said. "More than sufficient," she said. "Yes." "And the document," he said. "All 4. belong in the Ashvale holdings, she said. I will transfer them to your archive formally before I leave. Before you leave, he said. Yes, she said. He was quiet. What if you didn't, he said. She looked at him. Didn't leave, he said. She thought about 4 years of a pull toward northeast. About 43 hours in a dissolution storage facility. About 4 boxes and 11 volumes, and the document that had prompted a letter, and the letter that had prompted a courier, and the courier who had produced, eventually, this room. Veldren's archive, she said, has significant organizational challenges. It does, he said. The cross-referencing system was established in 1847 and has not been adequately maintained, she said. I know, he said. The bloodline records are filed under territorial records rather than genealogical records, she said, which is an error that has produced at least 3 governance complications in the past decade that I identified in 2 days of examination. Yes, he said. It would take a qualified archivist approximately 2 years to properly reorganize the system, she said. 2 years, he said. At minimum, she said. And after 2 years, he said. She held his gaze. After 2 years, she said, the archive would be properly organized. And the archivist would have enough familiarity with the governance environment to assess whether a longer arrangement was appropriate. A longer arrangement, he said. One thing at a time, she said. He looked at her with the full, unmanaged expression that she had, in 3 weeks, come to understand was the real version rather than the governance version. Accuracy, he said. Always, she said. All right, he said. 2 years. For the archive. For the archive, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Wren Ashfen, he said. Yes, she said. You sent a letter, he said. When most people would have either used the document for advantage or said nothing. Accuracy required it, she said. You preserved 4 boxes and 11 volumes, he said. When most people would have accepted the committee's categorization. They belonged to the people they were about, she said. You traveled 6 days, he said, without sending a response ahead. I did not know what I was going to find, she said. I wanted to assess before I stated a position. And now, he said. She thought about everything. About a 43-hour countdown in a dissolution storage facility. About 4 years of cataloging. About a document that was authentic and a letter that was honest and a 6-day journey that pulled northeast and a study in Veldren Pack where a man she had found worth knowing was looking at her with the full, unmanaged expression. Now, she said, I have a position. The formal bond acknowledgement happened 2 months later. Not 2 years. 2 months. Because the archival reorganization had been underway for 6 weeks and both of them had, in the private evaluation they had each been conducting, arrived at the same conclusion independently. The moon goddess's biological documentation was accurate. The person was the right person. The longer arrangement could begin now rather than in 2 years. Hadwick managed the ceremony with the specific, quiet efficiency of someone who had been preparing for it since approximately the 3rd week of Wren's residence, and who had arranged everything in advance of being formally asked. Asta, Veldren's post officer, attended with the expression of someone who had been carrying the information about the letter since day 1 and was deeply satisfied to see its conclusion. The Voss family sent a formal congratulatory message. Mari added a personal note that said, I told him you were worth meeting. I was right. The 4 documents were formally transferred to the Ashvale family holdings and archived in the reorganized cross-referencing system that Wren had implemented in the 6 weeks of preliminary work. They were filed under Bloodline Records, Historical, Mate Bond Documentation, the first entry in the newly organized section. Filed accurately. The way everything she touched was filed. There is something the old archivist texts said about the nature of records. Not the governance texts. Those said useful things about evidence and accountability and the protection that documentation provided against the rewriting of history. The archivist texts said something different. They said, a record is not simply the evidence of what happened. It is the protection of what is true for the people who were not present when it was documented, who will need it years later, who cannot know in advance that they will need it. Wren's great-grandmother had not known, when she was trained in the Ashfen archive, that the cross-referencing system she maintained would one day contain a document that a future generation would need. The archivist who had recorded the 73-year-old registration had not known that the child whose birth he was documenting would have a great-great-great-grandson who would need that document on the morning of a ceremony that was not yet the right ceremony. Wren herself had not known, when she spent 43 hours preserving what she could, which of the documents in those 4 boxes and 11 volumes would matter most. She had preserved them all anyway, because they belonged to the people they were about, because accuracy was not a selective practice, because the truth of the past was the protection of the future, and because one letter, sent honestly with no expectation of any particular outcome, had arrived at exactly the moment when it was needed and had changed everything. Not despite the timing. Because of it. The moon goddess's biology was documented in a record from 73 years ago. The truth had been waiting, accurately preserved, for exactly the people who needed it. All it had required was an archivist who understood that keeping the record was the work, whether or not she ever knew who the record was for. If you stayed with Wren from the document to the letter to the 6-day journey to the study to the 2 months to the ceremony, if you stayed with every step of the path that honesty and accuracy required, then you already know what this story was really about. It was not about a fated mate bond discovered in a dramatic moment. It was about the work of preserving truth for people who don't yet know they will need it. About the 43 hours in a storage facility for records that might have mattered and turned out to matter enormously. About the letter sent honestly with no expectation of any particular outcome. About accuracy as the only form of protection that endures. And about one woman who could have kept the document, who would have been completely justified in keeping it. Because what did a dissolved Pax archivist owe a powerful alpha who had never known she existed, and who chose instead to send the letter? Because the document belonged to him. Because the truth belonged to him. Because accuracy required it. That choice changed everything. Not because she knew it would. Because she did it anyway. This channel is here every single week for the ones who preserve the truth, for people who don't know they need it yet. Who spend 43 hours in the difficult places because the records belong to the people they're about. Who write the honest letter even when the most likely outcome is no response. The truth you are keeping is someone's record. Keep it. Subscribe. Hit that bell. Drop your location in the comments. I need to know where in the world tonight someone needed to hear that the honest letter, sent without expectation, is always the right choice. Always. The next story starts with a record that has been waiting, and ends with the person who finally finds it. Don't miss it. See you there.